Welcome to our study of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel is about how Yahweh recompenses King David and Israel according to David's obedience and disobedience. The authorship of 1 and 2 Samuel is anonymous. Rabbinic tradition ascribes the writing to Samuel. Samuel probably wrote much of 1 Samuel, but his death makes it certain that he did not write later sections. It is interesting to note that 1 Chronicles 29, verses 29 and 30, affirm a writing ministry of various prophets. The latter parts of 1 Samuel and all of 2 Samuel may have been written by these various prophets or edited together from their records. 2 Samuel spans a period from the death of Saul to the closing days of King David in 1011 down to 971 BC. After the death of Saul, David moved very quickly to consolidate his kingdom. His kingdom expanded quickly because the Lord was blessing his obedience. Unfortunately, David became lazy and disobedient. When he should have been at war, he was raping, or at the very least, committing adultery with Bathsheba and murdering Uriah, her husband, to cover up his sin. The nation was blessed or blasted according to the spiritual stability or instability of the king. In this book we see the rise and fall of the nation with the rise and fall of King David. The nation reaped what the leadership sowed. The many references to Israel argues that the final form was finished sometime after the division of Israel into two kingdoms in 931 BC. This was a period after the completion of Solomon's reign. Since there was a tradition of the prophets to keep written records of God's dealing with Israel, it can be assumed that 1 and 2 Samuel would have been available to the generations of the united monarchy. The final form would have been given to the generations of the divided monarchy. These generations would have experienced the ebb and flow of both spiritual blessings and national crises. The period of Saul was one of great hope as the nation began to assert itself militarily. The same period was one of great despair as Saul assaulted the priestly system and ruled with an insane tyranny. The early period of David brought new hope as he led the nation to national peace and a place of domination over international events. The latter period of David brought despair as domestic strife weakened the nation and sent it into turmoil. The Solomonic period brought great prosperity and peace. This was the age of wisdom and song. The great temple was completed, and the people had the opportunity of national celebration. At this same time, the seeds and weeds of idolatry, immorality, apostasy, and civil war were growing in the foundational cracks of the kingdom. The major argument is that Israel's prosperity and security are dependent on the submission of the monarchy and people to Yahweh, the Lord God. A major purpose was to encourage Israel and her monarchy to trust Yahweh's theocracy and obey his covenant so that they may prosper and live securely in the promised land. Some key verses are 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 and 13. It states, "When your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." Some major themes are David's compassion for his enemies in contrast to others, God's protection of the anointed and innocent people, consequences of sin, particularly David's rape of Bathsheba. The Davidic covenant, contrast between David and Joab. The transfer of wives, David's victory over his foreign enemies. And you will discover more as you read. An exegetical outline of 2 Samuel can be divided into 7 sections. First, David becomes king and consolidates his kingdom, chapters 1 through 6. Second, the Lord God forms a covenant with David and his house, chapter 7. Third, David defeats his enemies to extend his kingdom, chapters 8 through 10. Fourth, and this is a very pivotal chapter, David commits rape, adultery, and murder, chapter 11. Fifth, David's sin results in conflict and judgment in the kingdom, chapters 12 through 18. Sixth, David returns to Jerusalem to rule over Israel, chapters 19 and 20. Seventh, events in David's life and his last words to Israel, chapters 21 through 24. Now let's put our feet into the sands of time so that we can read or listen to the history of Israel's transition from the period of the judges to the period of the kings. Imagine that you're living in a period of history when the influence of the king on the kingdom is immense. Your ancestors have rejected the theocracy of the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, for a monarchical king like other nations. God has given you a king, but the king's weaknesses bring consequences on the nation. You have watched the nation rise and fall under the leadership of the king. Your nation is splitting apart into Judah, the 2 southern tribes, and Israel, the 10 northern tribes. Powerful men contend for places of influence. The nation is breaking apart because of civil war. You want to learn from the failures and successes of past leaders so that you can live in the covenant peace of Yahweh Elohim, the Lord God. You want to learn how God has providentially cared for Israel in spite of the sins of the kings, the priests, and the people.